Hi, welcome to the St. Augustine Lighthouse Maritime Museum's Ask an Expert series. My name is Dorothy Rowland and I am an archaeological conservator at the lighthouse. An artifact conservator is someone who is trained in different methods and techniques to conserve archaeological artifacts by stopping the current corrosion of the object and preventing future corrosion. An archaeology or conservation degree, a master's is usually preferred, but really it's the specialization in conservation and experience and training. All the conservators at the lighthouse are actually trained in artifact conservation specifically for underwater sites as our specialization. So conservation and restoration are terms that are often used in the museum world. They sound like they're very similar processes, but there's actually some very important differences. So conservation is when an object is stabilized in its current state, leaving behind any markings or damage. You're just stabilizing what is there and trying to keep it from further corrosion or destruction. In contrast, restoration is when you're actually restoring an object to as close as its original condition as possible. So no, each type of material reacts differently with chemicals. So a chemical that works really well on one type of material may do nothing to another material type, or it might even harm it. Perfect example of this is organics and metals. A lot of times we'll find composite artifacts that have both organic and metal materials on them, and they have to be separated for conservation so that the treatments don't negatively affect the different material types. So yes, materials can make a huge difference in how easy or hard an artifact is to conserve. So an artifact with only one type of material is usually easier, and of course the material type can make a huge difference. So a brick is really easy to conserve. An axe head is also fairly easy, it's just a little bit more labor intensive. Now an object that has more than one type of material, we usually call it a composite artifact, and that one is a lot harder to conserve because, as I stated previously, you actually have to separate the two materials, and how intricate an object is can be a determining factor in how easy it is or how hard it is to conserve. There is no real hard and fast timeline for artifacts. So each object or each artifact has its own timeline for conservation. If it is a larger or more complex artifact, it'll usually take longer. Types of treatments and types of materials also play a role in determining how long it will take. So a lot of times organic treatments will take longer than treatments for, say, metal. So there's a couple of different things that we look at when we're determining whether or not we're going to conserve an artifact. The first thing we look at is it going to survive? Not everything can withstand the chemical processes that are required for conservation. A lot of times if something isn't going to survive, then we'll either leave it alone. So that means either repatriating it back to site or maybe just putting it in storage. So the method or the reasoning behind that is because we don't know what technologies the future will hold, and there is always the hope that more advancements will come that will actually help to conserve those items in the future. Sometimes the object is already gone. So an example of that would be if we bring up a concretion and there's a hollow inside of the concretion, we can actually put epoxy into that and use the concretion as a mold, and we'll end up with an epoxy cast of whatever that object was. And so then we can use that to study and research, but there's not an object there to conserve. We're able to take a cast of what was once there. Another reason why we may not decide to conserve an artifact is if we already have a representative sample from that site. So the perfect example, we have a lot of clothing irons from this site, and so we have pulled up a fair number of them, and we are working on conserving some. But there's also a number that we either repatriated or just never brought up because we already had enough, or we already had a representative sample, and there's no reason for us to bring up more when we can leave those behind in the future. If archaeologists go back to the site with better technology, better methods, then they can actually try and conserve them in the future and maybe come up with better results than we can now. So once an object has been conserved, it will either be put on display in the museum or it will go into collections for storage. All of the objects that we excavate from shipwrecks are actually on loan from the state of Florida. So once the research is done on site for those objects, or we're not using them for an exhibit anymore, they're actually transferred to the state where they can be used for research or loaned out to other museums. So thank you for tuning in to the conservation edition of Ask an Expert. For more information on the lighthouse, check out our website at www.staugustinelighthouse.org. Stay safe and remember to love your lighthouse.